we basically see a massive increase in video plays. In addition to that, a massive increase in watched minutes. But what does it mean now for the underlying video infrastructure tech? I mean, there's a much higher burden on the networks right now. And yes, it is the case. It's really skyrocketing at the moment. The combination of more video as well as longer consumption times of video multiply in terms of like the actual data that's transmitted. And just think about it. You're at home, you have a pretty decent internet connection, you have a bigger screen to watch higher quality video on. And maybe you even upgrade your home entertainment devices during this time, buy the newest TV on Amazon or get a connected device to your big screen. So all of those things result in a massive increase of data traffic and the burden in the networks that we are seeing out there. And that's a big challenge for ISPs and network providers. And we see that directly reflecting in the user experience. So this 380% traffic increase results in the decreased quality of service on the streaming systems. We see about a 30% increase in startup time. So the time it takes for a stream to actually load and get started across our global customer base. We see that in the tier 1 customers that we have, we are kind of specialized in more complex and larger accounts. And we also see that in the US, in comparison to the 30% worldwide, we see about a 25% increase in video startup time across our US customers. And in the US, about half of the top 10 streaming services are the one or the other way working with us. So we are all sitting at home and we are all consuming a lot more content, either through news, real-time communication, like such a webinar now, as well as media entertainment or games and things like that. And we see an average decrease in download speed of 15%, which is remarkable considering the increase of traffic. Look at that, 380% more traffic on the network and only a 15% increase in download speed that we can measure. So I think we should give a shout out to all the people that work on keeping the infrastructure up and running, keeping the news up and running and things like that. We see that in our customer base, there are a lot of people really giving their best to keep people informed, but also keep people entertained and sane during this challenging time right now. So what are the impacts of that for the technology providers and the technology stacks out there? I mean, there is a lot of pressure on companies to provide a reliable service and at the same time not to like consume all the bandwidth in the networks. And in addition to that, in contrast to traditional broadcast distribution, with broadcast distribution, you had a pretty fixed infrastructure costs in many cases. If you take, for example, satellite distribution, that's a pretty fixed cost compared to an OTT-based unicast distribution, where every additional user creates additional distribution costs. And I think here it is very, very important for the operational expenses of the service providers to have a scalability of marginal costs that is decreasing with additional users and to leverage this economics of scale and to decrease the bandwidth footprint in the network. And I think as a result of this public pressure, but also commercial pressure, innovation is currently driving and innovation is happening much faster than it usually does. I mean, we see business innovation happening. I mean, if you look at Airbnb, they are suddenly doing online experiences. If you look into sports subscription services, they're doing now online classes, for example. Some of them are our customers and their traffic is skyrocketing. A lot of media and entertainment companies switch from live to video on demand, also sport properties, which we also see in our data. So it's really interesting what happens on the business side. And it's also interesting what happens on the technology side. On the next slide, we can see also actual data from our customers. We see that's the distribution of video compression technologies available to the end devices of streaming services worldwide. And today, 100% of the devices support AVC. That's the most commonly used compression standard out there. It's about 15 years old, and it does a proper job, but there are much more efficient standards out there. VP9, for example, or HEVC, for example. VP9 is an open source compression standard. HEVC is a commercial standard that's supported by a majority of the devices in the device ecosystem. Now, it's on the providers, it's on the technology stacks to leverage those opportunities to decrease the bandwidth consumption and to increase the efficiency of streaming services. And I think here is a lot of innovation happening. I mean, some services are doing that since a while. Netflix is doing VP9 since a few years. Hotstar in India is extremely successful with VP9 as well. And we see more and more customers picking that up and innovating in terms of like new technologies and more efficient technologies. We see a specific example of one customer that was facing those challenges. Massively increased usage numbers, massively increased traffic, public authorities pressuring the customer to like reduce the footprint in the network. And I mean, that's a massive challenge for them. And within 1 or 2 weeks, they really turned around the infrastructure stack and improved the efficiency by 30%. So the average bandwidth that they consume for a user in that particular country and setup went from 2.2 megabit per second to 1.5 megabit per second. So they could continue to continue to serve their customers while decongesting the network quite massively. And there are plenty of things available for that. I mean, you look into the data that you see from your network, you look into your encoding efficiencies, you look into the codecs that you're using, you look into more intelligent and newer ways of doing video compression. Per title or per asset encoding is done by Netflix since quite some time now. And now it's also picking up in much more services out there. And I think that's really, from a technology perspective, as much as you can say it, it's a very interesting time right now when it comes to innovation and changes in the video stacks. And I think that's also important for the moment, because what's happening once we come out of this crisis? What happens to user retention and what happens to the business models? With increased usage, we have to invest in OpEx optimizations, and with increased customer bases, we have also to invest in retention. I mean, I mentioned earlier, a lot of devices are currently upgraded. We see newer devices entering the user base, and those devices have new features like HDR, like 4K, and all those technologies that the customer and the consumer is paying for. And they also want to leverage those things in the streaming service of choice. So I think that are going to be challenges for the future. As a summary for the technology impact, yeah, there are a lot of optimizations that are currently happening, and there's a lot of pressure around that. We're now tackling the low-hanging fruits, but I think that's igniting a lot of innovation and movement when it comes to video streaming infrastructure, which will lay the surface for a bigger shift from linear broadcast to OTT going forward.